The evening sky outside was painted in deep shades of blue and purple, the city lights flickering to life as the sun dipped below the horizon. Emily sat in the living room, scrolling through her laptop, the soft hum of the TV in the background providing a comforting white noise. She glanced at the clock. It was past 10 p.m., and the apartment was quiet except for the occasional muffled sound from Jason's room. She hadn't seen him since dinner, and curiosity got the better of her. Rising from the couch, she padded down the hallway, her bare feet silent on the polished wooden floor. The door to Jason's room was slightly ajar, and a soft glow spilled into the hallway. Emily paused, hesitating for a moment before pushing the door open gently. What she saw made her freeze in place. Jason was sitting on his bed, his back against the headboard, his laptop propped open on his knees. The screen cast a faint glow on his face, and Emily's eyes quickly registered what he was watching, an adult movie, the kind that left little to the imagination. Jason's hand moved under the blanket, and his face was flushed with a mix of concentration and guilt. "Jason," Emily said softly, her voice breaking the heavy silence. He jumped, his head snapping up as if he'd been caught committing a crime. He quickly slammed the laptop shut, his face turning beet red. "Emily, I didn't hear you come in," he stammered, pulling the blanket up to his chest as if it could shield him from her gaze. Emily stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. She crossed her arms and leaned against the wall, her expression calm but curious. "What are you doing?" she asked, though the answer was painfully obvious. Jason looked down, avoiding her eyes. I was just... "It's okay," Emily interrupted, her tone gentle. "You don't have to explain. I know what you were doing." The room fell silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Jason fidgeted with the edge of the blanket, his heart pounding in his chest. He felt exposed, vulnerable, and utterly embarrassed. Emily walked over to the bed and sat down on the edge, her presence both comforting and unnerving. She studied him for a moment, her eyes softening. "Jason, do you want to talk about it?" He hesitated, his mind racing. He wanted to brush it off, to pretend nothing had happened, but the weight of her gaze made it impossible. "I'm just nervous," he admitted quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Nervous about what?" Emily asked, her tone encouraging. Jason sighed, running a hand through his messy hair. "About Sarah. We've been dating for a while, and she wants to take things to the next level, but I don't know what I'm doing. I'm scared I'll mess it up and embarrass myself." Emily nodded, her expression thoughtful. She reached out and placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Jason, it's normal to feel that way. Everyone feels nervous their first time. It's a big moment, and it's okay to be unsure." Jason looked up at her, his eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and desperation. "But what if I'm terrible at it? What if she's disappointed?" Emily chuckled softly, squeezing his shoulder. "You're overthinking it. Just be yourself. Communication is key. Talk to her, listen to her, and don't be afraid to take things slow. It's not about being perfect. It's about being present." Jason nodded, but the doubt still lingered in his eyes. I wish I knew what to expect. I don't want to let her down." Emily sighed, her heart aching for him. She wanted to reassure him, to take away his fears, but she knew words could only do so much. "You'll figure it out," she said finally, standing up. "Just trust yourself." She left the room, closing the door behind her, and leaned against the wall in the hallway. Her heart was racing, her mind swirling with conflicting emotions. She wanted to help Jason, to ease his worries, but she wasn't sure how far she could or should go. As she walked back to the living room, she couldn't shake the image of Jason's face, his vulnerability, his fear, his need for guidance. She sat down on the couch, staring blankly at the TV, her mind racing. How could she help him? What could she do to ensure he felt confident and prepared? The questions gnawed at her, and she knew she wouldn't be able to sleep until she found an answer. For now, though, she let out a long sigh and leaned back against the cushions, her thoughts consumed by her stepson's dilemma. The days that followed were filled with an unspoken tension that Emily couldn't ignore. Jason's confession hung in the air, a constant echo of his anxieties and the growing distance between them. Emily found herself watching him more closely, noticing the way he fidgeted during meals, the way he seemed lost in thought, his mind clearly elsewhere. She could see the weight of his worries pressing down on him, and it tore at her heart. She had always been close to Jason, even though she wasn't his biological mother. When she married his father 5 years ago, Jason had been just a shy teenager, still navigating the awkwardness of adolescence. Over time, they had developed a bond, one that was both maternal and friendly. But now, faced with his insecurities, Emily felt an overwhelming urge to help him, to guide him through this pivotal moment in his life, even if it meant stepping into uncharted territory. One evening, as she stood in the kitchen preparing dinner, she caught herself staring out the window, her hands absently chopping vegetables. Jason was in the living room, sprawled on the couch, scrolling through his phone. He looked restless, his leg bouncing up and down, a clear sign of his inner turmoil. Emily sighed, setting the knife down and wiping her hands on a towel. She walked over to the living room, standing in the doorway for a moment before speaking. "Jason," she said softly, her voice breaking the silence. He looked up, startled. "Yeah? You okay? You've been quiet lately." Jason shrugged, avoiding her gaze. "I'm fine. Just thinking about stuff." Emily walked over to the couch and sat down beside him, her expression concerned. "Is this about what we talked about the other night? About Sarah?" Jason hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah. I don't know how to stop worrying about it. It's all I can think about." Emily reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder, giving it a gentle squeeze. "Jason, it's normal to feel that way, but you can't let it consume you. You'll figure it out when the time comes." Jason looked at her, his eyes filled with uncertainty. "I wish I could be sure. I don't want to mess it up." Emily's heart ached for him. She wanted to reassure him, to give him the confidence he needed, but she knew words alone wouldn't be enough. She needed to do something more, something that would truly help him. That night, as she lay in bed, her mind raced with ideas. She couldn't shake the feeling that she needed to take action, to guide him in a way that went beyond words. But how? She tossed and turned, her thoughts swirling with possibilities. The next morning, she woke up with a plan forming in her mind. It was bold, unconventional, and carried risks. But she knew it might be the only way to help Jason. She decided to start small, testing the waters to see how he would react. Over the next few days, Emily began to subtly shift her behavior. She started wearing more form-fitting clothes around the house, soft, clingy fabrics that accentuated her curves. She chose a tight black turtleneck that hugged her figure, paired with high-waisted jeans that emphasized her slender waist. She wore a thin, silky robe around the house, the fabric sliding against her skin as she moved, the deep V-neckline hinting at the curves beneath. She left the bathroom door slightly ajar when she showered, the sound of water and the faint scent of her perfume drifting into the hallway. Jason couldn't help but glance toward the open door, catching glimpses of her silhouette behind the frosted glass, the steam rising around her like a tantalizing veil. One evening, as she walked past Jason in the hallway, she wore a short, fitted dress that hugged her hips and showed off her legs. The hemline teased the edge of daring, and she noticed how his eyes flickered down for a moment before darting away, his cheeks flushing. She even accidentally sent him links to adult movies, claiming they were meant for a friend. The text message appeared on his phone while they were sitting in the living room together, and Emily pretended not to notice the way he fumbled with his phone, his face turning red as he quickly closed the app. Each interaction left Jason flustered, but intrigued. He found himself stealing glances at her when she wasn't looking, his heart racing at the sight of her in a tight sweater, or the way her hair cascaded down her back when she wore it loose. He didn't understand why she was acting this way, but he couldn't deny the effect it had on him. Emily watched him closely, gauging his reactions. She could see the confusion in his eyes, the way he struggled to reconcile his feelings. It was working. Her plan was slowly breaking down the barriers between them, creating a space where she could guide him in a way that felt natural, even if it was unconventional. By the end of the week, Emily knew it was time to take the next step. She sat down one evening, her heart pounding as she mentally prepared herself for what she was about to do. She had thought it through carefully, weighing the risks and the potential benefits. It was a bold move, one that would change their relationship forever, but she knew it was the only way to truly help him. As she looked at Jason sitting across from her at the dinner table, his brow furrowed as he poked at his food, she made her decision. She would be the one to teach him, to show him how to be confident and attentive, to ensure he wouldn't feel lost or insecure when the time came. It wasn't just about helping him, it was about giving him the tools he needed to navigate this part of his life with confidence and grace. That night, as she lay in bed, her mind was made up. She would start the next day, slowly building up to the moment when she would offer herself as his guide. It was a decision that both excited and terrified her, but she knew it was the only way to truly help him. And so, with a deep breath and a resolute heart, Emily closed her eyes and let sleep take her, her mind already racing with the possibilities of the days to come. The morning sun streamed through the curtains, casting a warm glow over Emily's bedroom. She sat at her vanity, brushing her hair with slow, deliberate strokes, her mind focused on the day ahead. Today was the day she would take the next step in her plan, a bold move that would either bring her closer to helping Jason or risk shattering the delicate balance between them. She stood up and walked to the kitchen, where Jason was sitting at the table, a bowl of cereal in front of him, scrolling through his phone. He looked up as she entered the room, his eyes flickering over her loose robe before he quickly looked away. "Morning," he mumbled, his voice sounding oddly strained. "Good morning," Emily replied, her tone light and casual. She poured herself a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter, crossing her legs. "You know, I've been meaning to try that new Italian restaurant downtown, the one that just opened. Everyone's been raving about it." Jason nodded, though he looked slightly confused. "Actually," Emily continued, her tone casual, "why don't you join me? It'll be fun. We can make it a dinner date." Jason's eyebrows shot up and he stared at her, clearly caught off guard. "A dinner date?" "Sure," Emily said, shrugging as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "We haven't spent much time together lately. It'll be nice to catch up." Jason hesitated, his eyes flickering over her outfit again. "I don't know. I guess I could." "Great," Emily said, her smile widening. "It's settled then. I'll make the reservation for 7. Be ready by then, okay?" Jason nodded, though he still looked a little dazed. "Okay." Emily finished her coffee and set the cup in the sink, her movements calm and unhurried. "I'll see you tonight," she said, giving him a warm smile before heading back upstairs. Once in her room, she let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The first step was done, she had his attention, and he'd agreed to dinner. Now she needed to make sure everything went according to plan. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Emily spent the afternoon preparing for the evening, choosing her outfit carefully. A red, form-fitting dress she hadn't worn in years. The dress hugged her curves in all the right places, with a flared skirt that ended mid-thigh and a neckline that was just low enough to be alluring without being overt. She paired it with black heels that added a few inches to her height and completed the look with a delicate gold necklace that rested just above her collarbone. She spent extra time on her makeup, opting for a smoky eye and a bold red lip that matched her dress. Her hair she styled in loose waves, letting it cascade down her back. She studied herself in the mirror, adjusting the straps and smoothing out the fabric. Satisfied, she turned and headed downstairs, her heart pounding with anticipation. Jason was waiting in the living room, dressed in a button-up shirt and jeans. He looked nervous, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, but his eyes widened when he saw her. "Ready?" Emily asked, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. Jason nodded, swallowing hard. "Yeah, you look amazing." Emily smiled softly. "Thank you. Let's go." They drove to the restaurant in relative silence, the tension between them palpable. When they arrived, the hostess led them to a cozy table in the corner, the dim lighting and soft music creating an intimate atmosphere. Emily sat down, crossing her legs slowly, her dress riding up just enough to reveal a hint of her thigh. She noticed how Jason's eyes lingered for a moment before he quickly looked away, his cheeks flushing. They ordered their meals, making small talk as they waited for the food to arrive. Emily kept the conversation light, asking about Jason's day, his classes, and his friends. but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he seemed distracted. As the evening wore on, Emily began to subtly test the waters. She leaned forward slightly when she spoke, giving him a glimpse of her cleavage, and brushed her foot against his leg under the table. Jason stiffened, his eyes darting to hers before he quickly looked away, his face turning red. "Jason," Emily said softly, her voice drawing his attention back to her. "I want you to know that I'm here for you. Whatever you're going through, you can talk to me." Jason nodded, though he looked conflicted. "I know," he said quietly. "It's just hard to talk about." Emily reached across the table, placing her hand over his. "I understand, but you don't have to go through this alone." Jason stared at her hand, his breath hitching slightly. "Emily, Before he could finish, Emily interrupted him. "Excuse me for a moment," she said, standing up and smoothing out her dress. "I need to use the restroom." She walked away, leaving Jason sitting at the table, his mind racing. In the restroom, Emily took a deep breath, steadying herself. She reached under her dress and slipped off her panties, folding them neatly and tucking them into her purse. Then she touched up her lipstick, checked her reflection, and headed back to the table. When she returned, Jason looked up at her, his expression a mix of confusion and anticipation. Emily sat down and reached into her purse, pulling out the folded panties. She slid them across the table to him, her voice low and intimate. "Keep these," she said, her eyes locking with his. "They're yours now." Jason stared at the panties in front of him, his face turning bright red. He opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. Emily smiled softly, leaning back in her chair and signaling the waiter. "Check, please," she said, her tone calm and composed. The waiter nodded and walked away, leaving Jason still speechless, his mind racing as he stared at the folded panties on the table. Emily sipped her wine, her gaze steady, knowing that the night had only just begun. The air in the restaurant felt heavy, charged with an unspoken tension that neither Emily nor Jason could ignore. Jason's hands trembled as he reached for his glass of water, his throat dry, his mind spinning. The folded panties sat on the table between them, a silent but undeniable symbol of the shift in their relationship. He couldn't bring himself to look at them, or at Emily. His heart pounded in his chest and he felt like a deer caught in headlights, unsure of what to do or say. Emily, on the other hand, remained calm and composed. She sipped her wine, her eyes never leaving Jason's face, watching every flicker of emotion that crossed his features. She could see the conflict in his eyes, the confusion, the arousal, the fear. It was exactly what she had hoped for, but she knew she had to tread carefully. This was uncharted territory, and one misstep could destroy everything. The waiter returned with the check, placing it neatly on the table. Emily reached for it, pulling out her wallet and leaving a generous tip. She stood up gracefully, smoothing out her dress, and looked down at Jason. "Ready to go?" she asked, her voice soft but firm. Jason nodded numbly, his movements slow and stiff as he rose from his seat. He glanced at the panties on the table, hesitating for a moment before grabbing them and stuffing them into his pocket. His face flushed crimson, but he said nothing. They walked out of the restaurant in silence, the cool night air a stark contrast to the warmth inside. Emily's heels clicked against the pavement as they made their way to the car, the sound sharp and rhythmic in the quiet of the evening. Jason fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking as he unlocked the door and held it open for her. Emily slid into the passenger seat, crossing her legs deliberately, her dress riding up just enough to reveal a hint of her thigh. She noticed Jason's eyes flicker toward her before he quickly looked away, his breathing uneven as he climbed into the driver's seat. The drive home was silent, the tension between them almost unbearable. Emily glanced at Jason out of the corner of her eye, noticing how his hands clenched the steering wheel, his knuckles white. She could see the conflict in his expression, the way his jaw tightened and his breath hitched as he tried to focus on the road. "Jason," she said softly, breaking the silence. He flinched, his grip tightening on the wheel. "Yeah?" Emily shifted slightly in her seat, uncrossing her legs slowly and then recrossing them, the movement deliberate and tantalizing. The hem of her dress inched higher, revealing more of her smooth, bare thigh. She noticed Jason's eyes dart toward her for a split second before snapping back to the road, his Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed hard. Emily smiled to herself, her gaze lingering on his profile. "You're awfully quiet," she said, her tone teasing. "Something on your mind?" Jason shook his head quickly, his voice strained. "No, just thinking about the food. It was good." Emily chuckled softly, the sound low and melodic. It was delicious," she agreed, her eyes sparkling with mischief. She leaned back in her seat, one hand resting casually on the console between them. Her fingers brushed against his thigh, the touch light but unmistakable. She could feel the tension radiating from him, the way his muscles twitched under her fingers. It was exactly what she wanted, to push him to the edge, to make him confront his feelings. But she knew she had to be patient. This wasn't something that could be rushed. As they approached a red light, Emily subtly spread her legs slightly, her dress shifting to reveal a glimpse of what lay beneath. She noticed Jason's breath hitch, his eyes flickering toward her before he quickly looked away, his face flushed. She didn't say anything, letting the moment hang in the air, the mood both playful and intense. The light turned green and Jason pressed the accelerator, his hands gripping the wheel tightly. Emily leaned back in her seat, her eyes drifting to the window as she watched the city lights blur past. She kept her legs slightly parted, her movements subtle but deliberate, maintaining the teasing atmosphere without saying a word. The rest of the drive passed in silence, the tension between them palpable. When they finally pulled into the driveway, Jason cut the engine and sat there for a moment, his hands still gripping the wheel, his breathing shallow. Emily unbuckled her seatbelt and turned to face him, her expression soft but determined. "Thank you for tonight," she said, her voice warm. "I had a wonderful time." Jason nodded, though he still couldn't bring himself to look at her. "Me too," he mumbled, his voice barely audible. Emily reached over and gently tilted his chin, forcing him to meet her gaze. "Jason," she said, her tone firm but gentle, "you don't have to be afraid. I'm here for you. Whatever you're feeling, you can talk to me." Jason stared at her, his eyes brimming with a mix of emotions, fear, desire, confusion. He opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. Emily smiled softly, leaning in to place a gentle kiss on his cheek. "Let's go inside," she said, her voice soothing. She stepped out of the car, her heels clicking against the pavement as she walked toward the house. Jason followed close behind, his mind racing, his heart pounding in his chest. When they stepped into the house, the familiar surroundings felt different, charged with an energy that neither of them could ignore. Emily set her purse down on the entryway table and turned to Jason, her expression calm but expectant. "Why don't we sit for a while?" she suggested, her voice soft but firm. "We can talk." Jason hesitated, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew this wasn't just about talking. The way she'd looked at him in the car, the way she'd teased him with her movements, it all meant something, and he wasn't sure he was ready to confront it. But he also couldn't bring himself to say no. "Okay," he mumbled, his voice barely audible. Emily smiled and walked into the living room, her hips swaying ever so slightly as she moved. She stopped at the small bar cart in the corner and picked up a bottle of whiskey, holding it up for Jason to see. "Want one?" she asked, her tone casual but her eyes gleaming with mischief. Jason nodded, though he still couldn't bring himself to look at her. "Sure," he said, his voice hoarse. Emily bent over deliberately to prepare the drink, her dress riding up just enough to give him a clear view of what lay beneath. She knew he was watching, and she made the moment last, her movements slow and deliberate as she poured the whiskey into 2 glasses. Jason's breath hitched, his face flushing crimson as he quickly looked away. He could feel his heart racing, his mind spinning as he tried to process what was happening. Emily straightened up and walked over to him, a glass in each hand. She handed one to him, their fingers brushing as she did so, and then sat down on the edge of the couch, her legs crossed, her dress riding up just enough to reveal the smooth curve of her thigh. She patted the space beside her, her eyes locking with his. Jason followed her, his step slow and hesitant. He sat down on the couch, leaving a small but deliberate gap between them. He couldn't bring himself to look at her, his eyes fixed on the floor as he fidgeted with the hem of his shirt. The folded panties still sat in his pocket, a constant reminder of the tension between them. Emily studied him for a moment, her expression soft but calculating. She could see the conflict in his eyes, the way his body tensed as if he were bracing himself for something. She leaned forward slightly, her hand resting on the couch between them, her fingers brushing against his leg. "Jason," she said gently, her voice breaking the silence. "Look at me." He hesitated, his breath hitching as he finally turned to face her. His eyes were wide, filled with a mix of fear and curiosity, and Emily's heart ached for him. She reached out and gently placed her hand over his, her touch warm and reassuring. "You don't have to be scared," she said, her tone soothing. "I'm here for you. Whatever you're feeling, you can talk to me." Jason swallowed hard, his throat dry. I don't know what to say," he admitted, his voice trembling. Emily smiled softly, her thumb brushing over the back of his hand. "You don't have to say anything," she said. "Just listen." She shifted closer to him on the couch, her leg brushing against his. The heat of her body was intoxicating, and Jason felt his heart race as he struggled to focus on her words. Emily's every move was calculated, designed to heighten the tension between them. She uncrossed her legs slowly, letting her dress ride up even further, and then recrossed them, the movement deliberate and tantalizing. Jason's eyes flickered toward her for a split second before he quickly looked away, his face flushing crimson. She leaned in closer, her lips grazing his ear as she whispered, "Do you trust me?" Jason's entire body trembled, his heart pounding in his chest. "Yes," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Emily smiled, her lips brushing against his cheek as she pulled back slightly. Her hand moved from his to rest on his thigh, her touch light but unmistakable. She could feel the tension radiating from him, the way his muscles twitched under her fingers. For a moment, the room was silent, the air thick with anticipation. Then, without warning, Emily leaned in and kissed him. Jason froze, his body stiff with shock. He hesitated for a moment, his mind racing, but then something inside him gave way. He melted into the kiss, his hands trembling as they reached for her waist. Emily's lips were soft and warm, and the kiss was slow and deliberate, full of unspoken promises. Her hands moved to his shoulders, pulling him closer, and Jason let out a soft moan. The kiss deepened, as Emily guided Jason into a progression of intimacy he had never experienced before. Her movements confident and unhurried. Jason's hands trembled as they rested on her waist, unsure of where to go or what to do. But Emily was patient. She pulled back slightly, her breath mingling with his as she whispered, "Follow my lead." Her hands drifted to his, gently guiding them to her hips, then up her sides, teaching him how to touch her with intention. Jason's breath hitched as he followed her movements, his fingers trailing over the soft fabric of her dress, feeling the heat of her skin beneath. Emily's hands moved to his shoulders, her fingers brushing against the back of his neck as she leaned in to kiss him again. This time, there was no hesitation. Jason's hands grew bolder, exploring the curves of her body, his heart racing as he lost himself in the moment. After a while, Emily pulled back, her lips brushing against his cheek as she whispered, "Just a moment." She stood up gracefully, her dress swaying slightly as she walked out of the living room and down the hallway toward the bathroom. Jason sat there, his hands still trembling, his mind spinning. He could still feel the warmth of her lips on his, the softness of her skin under his fingers. The tension in the room was almost unbearable, and he wasn't sure how much more he could take. When Emily returned, she was no longer wearing the red dress. Instead, she stood in the doorway of the living room, clad in a black lace nightie that left little to the imagination. The delicate fabric hugged her curves, the intricate design accentuating her figure in a way that made Jason's breath catch in his throat. Emily leaned against the doorframe, her arms crossed loosely over her chest, her expression soft but confident. She could see the way Jason's eyes widened, the way his hands clenched the edge of the couch, his knuckles white. "Do you like what you see?" she asked, her voice low and teasing. Jason couldn't find the words to respond. His heart pounded in his chest, his eyes locked on her as if she were the only thing in the room. He had never seen her like this before, and the sight of her in lingerie left him speechless. Emily smiled, her gaze steady as she walked toward him, her every movement slow and deliberate. She stopped in front of him, her hips swaying slightly as she reached out to tilt his chin, forcing him to look up at her. "I asked you a question," she said, her tone playful but firm. Jason swallowed hard, his voice barely a whisper. "Yes." Emily's smile widened, and she leaned down, her lips brushing against his ear as she whispered, "Good." She straightened up and took a step back, her eyes never leaving his. The tension between them was palpable, the air thick with anticipation. Jason's hands trembled as he reached for her, but Emily took another step back, her smile teasing. "Patience," she said, her voice soft but commanding. Jason nodded, his breath coming in shallow gasps. He didn't know what to do, but he knew one thing for certain. He was completely under her spell. Emily turned and walked toward the hallway, her hips swaying with every step. She glanced over her shoulder, her eyes locking with his as she said, "Come with me." Jason followed Emily, his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his ears. Every step she took was deliberate, her hips swaying in the black lace nightie that clung to her curves like a second skin. The soft click of her heels against the hardwood floor echoed in the quiet house, a steady rhythm that matched the frantic beating of his heart. When they reached her bedroom, Emily turned to face him, her back against the doorframe, her arms crossed loosely over her chest. The soft glow of the bedside lamp illuminated her figure, casting shadows that made her appear almost ethereal. She smiled, a slow, knowing smile, and stepped aside, gesturing for him to enter. Jason hesitated for a moment, his feet rooted to the floor. He felt like he was standing on the edge of a precipice, unsure of whether to jump or step back. "Come in," Emily said, her voice low and inviting. Jason took a deep breath and stepped into the room, his eyes scanning the space around him. The bedroom was warm and intimate, the air thick with the scent of her perfume. The bed was neatly made, the soft sheets inviting, and the lamp on the nightstand cast a warm, golden glow over the room. Emily closed the door behind them and turned to face him, her hands resting on his chest. She could feel the rapid beat of his heart beneath her palms, the tension in his muscles as he stood there, trembling. "Are you nervous?" she asked, her tone soft but probing. Jason nodded, his throat dry. "A little," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily smiled, her thumb brushing against his cheek. "That's okay," she said, her voice soothing. "We'll take it slow." She leaned in and kissed him, her lips soft and warm against his. The kiss was slow and deliberate, full of unspoken promises, and Jason felt himself relax slightly. His hands moved to her waist, his fingers trembling as they brushed against the delicate lace of her nightie. Emily pulled back slightly, her breath mingling with his as she whispered, "Trust me." Jason nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. Emily took his hand and led him to the bed, her movements slow and deliberate. She gently pushed him onto the mattress and climbed on top of him, straddling his waist. Her hands rested on his chest, her fingers brushing against the fabric of his shirt. "Let me show you," she whispered, her voice low and intimate. Jason's hands trembled as they rested on her hips, his breath hitching as she leaned down to kiss him again. Her lips moved against his with a confidence that both thrilled and intimidated him, and he felt himself losing control. Emily was patient and encouraging, guiding him through their first intimate encounter. She taught him how to touch her, how to explore her body with intention, and how to be confident in his movements. "Like this," she whispered, her hand guiding his to the small of her back. Jason obeyed without hesitation, his fingers trailing over the smooth skin of her back. He could feel the heat of her body against his, the way her heart raced in tandem with his own. Emily's lips found his again, the kiss slow and deep, full of unspoken promises. Her hands moved to his shoulders, her fingers brushing against the back of his neck as she deepened the kiss. Jason's hands grew bolder, exploring the curves of her body, his heart racing as he lost himself in the moment. After a while, Emily pulled back, her lips brushing against his cheek as she whispered, "You're doing well." Her words sent a jolt of confidence through him, and Jason's hands moved to the small of her back, pulling her closer. The night passed in a blur of sensations, soft touches, whispered words, and slow, deliberate movements. When it was over, they lay together in the bed, their bodies entwined, their hearts still racing. Emily rested her head on Jason's chest, her fingers tracing lazy patterns on his skin. "You were amazing," she whispered, her voice soft and warm. Jason smiled, his hand resting on her back. "You taught me well," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily chuckled softly, the sound low and melodic. "Get some rest," she said, her voice soothing. Jason nodded, his eyes heavy with exhaustion. He pulled her closer, his arms wrapping around her as they drifted off to sleep. When Jason opened his eyes, the first thing he noticed was the soft, golden light filtering through the curtains. The room was quiet, the air still thick with the scent of Emily's perfume and the lingering warmth of their shared intimacy. His body felt heavy, his muscles relaxed in a way they hadn't been in years, but there was also a faint tension in his chest, an awareness of what had happened and what it meant. Emily was still asleep beside him, her head resting on his chest, her arm draped across his waist. Her breathing was slow and steady, her body curled against his as if she belonged there. Jason's hand rested lightly on her back, his fingers tracing idle patterns on her skin as he tried to process the events of the night. It all felt surreal, like a dream he wasn't sure he wanted to wake from. Emily had been patient and kind, guiding him through an experience that had left him feeling both exhilarated and vulnerable. She'd taught him how to touch her, how to be confident in his movements, and how to let go of the fear that had always held him back. But now, in the cold light of morning, the reality of what they'd done was starting to sink in. Jason's mind raced with questions about Sarah, about Emily, about where this left them. He felt a pang of guilt, but it was tempered by something else, something he couldn't quite name. Emily stirred beside him, her eyes fluttering open as she lifted her head to look at him. She smiled, a soft, sleepy smile, and brushed a strand of hair out of her face. "Good morning," she said, her voice husky with sleep. "Morning," Jason replied, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily studied him for a moment, her eyes searching his face as if trying to gauge his thoughts. "You okay?" she asked, her tone gentle but probing. Jason hesitated, his hands still resting on her back. I don't know," he admitted, his voice trembling. Emily nodded, her expression soft but understanding. She shifted slightly, propping herself up on her elbow so she could look at him more directly. Her hand rested on his chest, her fingers brushing against his skin in a soothing rhythm. "It's okay to feel conflicted," she said, her voice low and reassuring. "This was a big step for both of us, but you don't have to figure everything out right now. Just take it one step at a time." Jason nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. He wanted to believe her, to let go of the guilt and uncertainty that was weighing him down, but it wasn't that simple. Emily leaned down and kissed him, her lips soft and warm against his. The kiss was slow and tender, a silent promise that she was there for him, no matter what. When she pulled back, she smiled, her hand resting on his cheek. "Let's just enjoy this moment," she said, her voice soft but firm. Jason nodded, his hand moving to her waist as he pulled her closer. They lay there for a while, their bodies entwined, their hearts beating in sync. The room was quiet except for the soft sound of their breathing, and for a moment, everything felt right. Emily eventually slipped out of bed, stretching lazily as she reached for a silken robe draped over a chair. She tied it loosely around her waist and glanced back at Jason, her smile warm. "I'm starving. How about some breakfast?" Jason nodded, though his stomach was in knots. "Sure," he said quietly. Emily held out her hand, and Jason took it, letting her pull him to his feet. He felt oddly exposed, standing there in just his boxers, but Emily's calm demeanor helped ease some of his anxiety. They made their way to the kitchen, where Emily began pulling ingredients from the fridge and cabinets. She cracked eggs into a bowl, whisked them with a fork, and set a pan on the stove to heat. "You're pretty good at this," Jason said, trying to lighten the mood. Emily glanced over her shoulder and smiled. "Years of practice," she said. "I've always loved cooking. It's therapeutic." Jason nodded, his gaze lingering on her. Despite everything, he couldn't help but feel a sense of comfort in her presence. As Emily cooked, she kept up a steady stream of conversation, asking Jason about his favorite foods and sharing stories from her childhood. Her easygoing attitude helped ease some of the tension, and Jason found himself slowly relaxing. When the food was ready, they sat down at the small table by the window. The morning sunlight streamed in, casting a warm glow over the room. "Dig in," Emily said, gesturing to the plate of scrambled eggs, toast, and fresh fruit she'd prepared. Jason picked up his fork and took a bite, the flavors surprisingly comforting. "This is really good," he said, his voice sincere. Emily smiled. "Glad you like it." They ate in companionable silence for a while, the tension between them gradually easing. When they were finished, Emily leaned back in her chair and looked at Jason, her expression thoughtful. "We need to talk," she said, her tone gentle but serious. Jason nodded, his stomach tightening. He knew this conversation was coming, but he wasn't sure he was ready for it. Emily reached across the table and took his hand, her touch warm and reassuring. "I know this is complicated," she said, her voice low and soothing. "And I know you're probably feeling a lot of things right now. But I want you to know that I don't regret what happened last night, and I hope you don't either." Jason looked down at their hands, his mind racing. "I don't regret it," he said quietly. "But I don't know what this means. For us. For me and Sarah." Emily nodded, her expression understanding. "I get that," she said. "And I'm not asking you to make any decisions right now. This is a lot to process, and it's okay to take your time." Jason looked up at her, his eyes filled with uncertainty. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily smiled, her thumb brushing against the back of his hand. "I want you to be happy," she said, her voice sincere. "And I want to be a part of your life, whatever that looks like. But I'm not here to pressure you or complicate things. This is your journey, Jason. I'm just here to support you." Jason felt a lump form in his throat, his emotions swirling. He didn't know what to say, but he knew one thing for certain. He was grateful for her understanding and patience. They sat there for a while longer, talking about everything and nothing, the conversation flowing easily between them. By the time they finished, the sun was higher in the sky, and the morning felt less daunting. As they cleared the table together, Emily glanced at Jason and smiled. "Whatever happens," she said, her voice warm, "we'll figure it out, together."